Hey everyone, it's Nightharo here, and today I've got a one-bar Arcanist build guide for you. So with this build today, you do not need Oaken Soul, you actually don't need any mythics at all. You can use trial sets for the most damage, you'll want to do that. You don't lose that much damage though if you don't use any trial sets. So I will note on this card, I'm using this for two different things. I'm using this both for this build and for a non-beam build. The non-beam build does do a little bit less damage, but it's only a couple of tweaks to switch between builds. You need to change some CP, change one of your armor sets potentially, and then swap out two skills. So they're all on this card, but I'm going to do that separate. All right, so first things up here, we have our Deadly Cloak. Now, the reason we really like this skill is for, of course, the damage. There are other dots that could do something very similar. And if you decide you don't want to do daggers, you want to do an Inferno Staff, you want to swap this up to a Magicka build, you want to do a two-hander, something like that, you absolutely can. You would just swap it out for one of your kind of basic skills. So if you're doing, for example, if you're going to do a staff, you might do something like Wall of Elements. If you're going to do a bow, you would probably put Poison Arrow, Poison Injection here, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of options you could put here, but that's where your weapon skill is going to go. Now the reason for that is because you want to make sure that your weapon enchants are procced, and to do that you need to light attack or to have some sort of dot that is from that skill line going, and that'll have the best chance of keeping it procced. Also, you can do a one-time use thing from a skill line, like you could do snipe or something like that. You wouldn't want to do that with this build, but if you are using like snipe, it does have a chance to proc your weapon enchants. It's just a lot easier on a dot because it's proccing every turn and there's a chance to proc it. So you'll keep them up pretty much close to 100% of the theoretical time. So that's why we go with Deadly Cloak or just some skill from our weapon skill line as our first ability here. And then next up we have Inspired Scholarship. So we're using this for the dot, but the other and kind of main reason we're using it because it generates a crux for us whenever we don't have any. And it can do that once every 3 seconds. So our beam's gonna last for 4.5, and during that time we're gonna gain back a crux that we can then use to beam again. So that's why we have that. It's a good dot, but it also generates crux for us, so that's why we've chosen it here. And then next up is gonna be our Exhaustive Fate Carver. Now we're always gonna wanna cast this when we have 3 crux up. So just keep that in mind. Once you have 3 crux up, make sure your dots are up, then you go ahead and cast our Exhaustive Fate Carver. And this is where most of our damage is coming from on this build, and it's also why we can use one of the sets that we're going to use, which is Deadly. Next up here is going to be Cephaliarch's Flail. So we're using this because it increases our damage done to targets that have been hit by it by 5%, which is awesome. 5% damage across the board is a huge boon. So you always kind of want to use this skill with pretty much any Arcanist build, to be honest with you, any kind of DPS Arcanist build. But the other reason we're using it is to generate crux. So we're going to get one from our Inspired Scholarship typically after we've beamed, and then we'll do the other 2. So we'll cast this twice and then we'll beam again. So that's the way the rotation works. Next up here is going to be Trap Beast. This is a really good dot. We're already going to be in melee with our Deadly Cloak. It also gives us passive weapon and spell damage from the Fighter's Guild skill line, just the passives from there. Having any Fighter's Guild skill on your bar increases your weapon and spell damage by 3% per skill, so that's nice. And then of course it gives us Minor Force, which increases our critical damage by 10%. Now we are on an Arcanist build, and Arcanists can have a lot of penetration and a lot of critical damage just from passives in their skill line per skill in the DPS skill line. So you can be very high, way over critical damage, but it's there, so just keep that in mind. And then after that, we've got the Languid Eye for our ultimate, and yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it for our skills. So the way you want to start this is generally you'll precast Inspired Scholarship. It's a dot that doesn't go off until you're in combat, so you go ahead and precast that. Deadly Cloak, similar. It doesn't go off until you're close to an opponent, so you can cast that early. After that, you're just going to kind of run in. You want to drop your Trap Beast, Cephaliarch's Flail twice to get 3 stacks, and then beam with our Fate Carver. After that, we just cast Cephaliarch's Flail to get to 3 stacks. Make sure we keep all of our dots up, and then beam. If our dots are up, we get 3 stacks, we beam. Pretty simple rotation. It's a little weird with the 4.5 second cast, and then you want to try to light attack weave, but you just kind of do the best you can. And I got 98k, almost 99 I think was my highest parse with this. Now moving on to CP. So you're going to have Wrathful Strikes and then Exploiter. Exploiter, I will note, you really need somebody in the group that's applying off balance. On the trial dummy, it automatically does it for you, but if you have a heavy attack Sork, usually they're running Wall of Elements, maybe you have a healer who's doing a lightning staff with a wall of elements. That's the kind of thing that you want to make sure that you have exploiter. If not, you'll want to swap it up and go with something else. And then after that, it's biting aura and then thaumaturge. So damage over time, AoEs, which is really we're just trying to buff our beam, which is where most of our damage on this build is going to come from. If you are running around overland and you're having problems surviving, or if you want to slot a self-heal, first thing I would actually drop is probably Barb Trap. The reason I say Barb Trap is because it doesn't do any AoE damage. Yes, we're going to lose the minor force, sure, but the other thing is it can be a little bit hard to get it to proc, when you're running around like a crazy person trying to stay alive, so you can drop that and instead you'll go with your class heal. And for that I chose Evolving Runman here, and the reason I chose that is because it gives you a little bit of a heal over time. It's not huge, but it's also nothing to, scoff at, and a little bit of heal over time can be kind of nice. You could also run something like Resolving Vigor. That works just as well if you want more of a heal over time. A lot of times you don't need a huge burst heal, but Resolving Vigor won't heal you. So if you need something you ever want to be able to cast on someone else, you definitely probably want to go with Evolving Runman. There might be something else, but any kind of self-heal, or if you want a shield or something, that this is where you can put it. So next up is going to be our Red CP. So Red CP is really flexible. You can kind of do whatever you want with this. Rejuvenation is really nice for a little bit extra sustain. I don't think you're necessarily going to need it on this build, so you could probably swap it up to something else. Celerity gives you an extra 10% speed while you're in combat, which can be really nice. You can have a free dodge roll, extra health, so on and so forth. It's kind of like whatever looks good. There's not really a wrong answer here. And with the new trial and a lot of the newer content, you are getting CC'd a lot more. So having something where you can automatically break free is also not a terrible idea. After that, we have gear. So if you're brand new to the game, or if you're just trying to go with a crafted set, you're leveling or what have you, I would just go with Order's Wrath and Julianos as your 2 5-piece sets. Yes, you'll have a couple other sets that you can wear something else, but it kind of doesn't matter when you're leveling. It's not really that big of a deal. If you are already at max level, just any 2-piece bonus that's going to give you a weapon or spell damage is like the best thing to do while you're waiting or trying to farm your monster set. Once you get that, you can do Pillar of Nirn and Whirl of the Depths, and then Za'an. That's what I found that I was doing the most damage with. You could also swap out Pillar of Nirn for Deadly, and Deadly is a set you could just purchase. It's probably going to be fairly expensive right now because probably everybody wants it, but that's another set you could use. Typically with all builds for optimal DPS, unless you're wearing something like Oaken Soul, which gives you the buff from something else, but the 3-piece bonus from trial sets gives you an extra 5% damage, and generally that's going to be the best thing to have. Now, if you didn't want to run a trial sets, or you just don't run any trials or whatever, or if you already have Pillar of Nirn and you can purchase Deadly, you can actually run Pillar of Nirn and Deadly together. You lose a little bit of damage, but honestly, it's like a few K. It's not much at all, at least in my testing. For food with this build, you're just going to run max health and max stamina. That'll give you the most damage. If you decide that you're going to run, like I said, a Destro Staff or something like that, just swap it up and run max, and you're running max Magicka, run max mag, max health. If you're having problems with sustain, something like Lava Foot Stomp or Ghastly Eyeballs can be a good way to go. Gives you max resources and then recovery. If you're dying and need a little bit more health though, obviously switch to something with more max health. If you go with a food that has 3 resources, so it gives you max health, max one of the stats, and then recovery of one of the stats, just realize you're losing a bit of damage by doing that. It's like, I think 2%. Skinny Cheeks did a video on it actually, where he calculated the damage loss. I think it's like 2%, so it's not a whole lot, but just realize that is the case. Oh yes, and then of course the Thief Mundus. So the Thief Mundus gives us increased critical chance. That's just the best thing to go with, increases our damage the most. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this build. I will say that, the rotation feels pretty nice. It's pretty simple, pretty easy, and it's a great place to start to kind of get in a rhythm and kind of learn what the rhythm is. Where, you're casting your beam, it's done, check your hots, re-up them if you need to. If not, Cephaliarch's Flail a couple of times, and then beam again. And it makes for a really fun, kind of easier playstyle for those who are just getting into the game, and it slaps. It hits really hard too. So anyways, that's it for today. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.